Welcome to the 2025 Affordable Housing Program Compliance webinar. My name is Kelly Chu. I'm on the AHP compliance team, and I review initial monitoring requests. I will be presenting today with my colleague, and I will let her introduce herself now.
Hi, my name is Sharon Dawkins. I'm a part of the compliance team and I conduct the long-term monitoring reviews.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. So today we are going to discuss what to expect after the announcement of your AHP award and how to plan for a successful disbursement and initial monitoring review. So we will be covering documentation requirements for disbursement and initial monitoring, maintaining the project scoring commitments from the original application or any modifications, maintaining the project's need for subsidy and feasibility, basic requirements for the AHP retention documents, and common causes of noncompliance. Our goal is to avoid pitfalls that may cause the recapture of the AHP subsidy. So before we start, I want to talk about what the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco is. We are a government-sponsored enterprise, which means while we are a private entity, we only exist because of congressional statute. We are a cooperative made up of member financial institutions. AHP is funded by the bank's earning, not taxpayer funds. Our mission is to enable families and individuals of all income levels to obtain quality housing and become homeowners by providing low-cost funding and other services to members, and providing community investment programs to fund affordable housing and community economic development. So we can be different than other affordable housing gap financing. We are regulated by the Federal Housing Finance Authority, FHFA, which sets nationwide guidelines on how AHP operates, and we are audited annually on our compliance to the guidelines. AHP-funded projects must demonstrate feasibility at application, at disbursement, and at initial monitoring. Projects must demonstrate need for subsidy at application, at disbursement, and at initial monitoring. If the project changes and needs a modification, the project must have good cause, an attempt to cure, and must demonstrate why it cannot meet previous commitments. So we are assuming that you are attending this webinar because you have received an AHP award. Congratulations. We want to give a brief outline of the various compliance and reporting steps before we go deeper into the weeds of how to meet those steps. So after the announcement of our AHP award, a project has 4 years to complete construction and request disbursements for funds. The bank tracks construction progress by asking sponsors and members to complete an online semi-annual survey twice a year until the project is deemed to be complete, which is defined as having been approved for habitability and having the AHP subsidy fully disbursed. As soon as the project is deemed to be complete, it kicks off the 5-year retention period. Each unit exists a retention 5 years after the close of escrow. As it gets closer to the 4-year deadline for project completion, we will follow up on the semi-annual status report for more information on the project. If there is a change in staff, please notify the bank so that we can update our records with the most current contact person's information. Once the project is considered completed, you have 2 years to complete initial monitoring review. And finally, each unit exits the retention 5 years after the close of escrow. If any tenant tries to sell within that period, the bank will have to determine if a portion of AHP funds needs to be returned. If there are any significant changes in the project's characteristics, let us know so that we may modify the project profile and rescore it to ensure that it remains eligible for the AHP subsidy. The project must have good cause for any modification and must demonstrate why it cannot meet your previous commitments. So a project can request funds when it has full site control. All funds are secure and construction or rehab is imminent, underway, or once your construction is completed. For down payment assistance programs, we require homeowners to be selected and income qualified. When you are ready to request disbursement of the AHP subsidy, visit our website to review the disbursement request instructions and complete the required forms. So similar to application, documents can only be accepted electronically. So therefore, before submitting the completed forms, a workspace must be requested and set up through our online portal. We will cover electronic document submission later in our presentation. So once the forms are submitted, be sure to email the bank and let us know that the disbursement package is ready for review. So the disbursement request document will list all required forms, including the workspace request form to set up the secure portal for disbursement. And we aim to review the disbursement within 45 days, but this process depends on the complexity of the disbursement and the responsiveness of the sponsor and member to additional questions. So once the AHP funds are disbursed to the member must deliver the AHP subsidy to the project owner within 30 days from the bank's funding date. It is very important to meet the 30 days grace period to avoid interest repayment to the bank. Okay, so now let's go over the information that will be requested at disbursement. So for all projects, documentation validating land costs is required if it was not previously submitted at application. A completed signed HIQW, which stands for Household Income Qualification Workbook, and backup income documentation will be required for 10% of all homeowners in the project. For projects with only 2 units, documentation will be collected for both units. An estimated settlement statement must be provided for all home buyers currently in escrow. And the bank also requires documentation for all previously closed escrows, including the final settlement statement, documentation for sources paid outside of closing, and final AHP retention documents, which includes the AHP note and recorded deed of trust with AHP rider. So for projects that are completed at time of disbursement, additional documentation will also be required. For cost validation, backup documentation must be provided for 100% of sponsor provided construction management costs and 35% of all other development costs. If there is a deficit in the budget, gap source documentation will also be required. If promotion of empowerment and community stability commitments are in place, documentation for those commitments must also be provided. And now I'm going to pass it off to Shan, and she will cover submitting documentation to the bank.
Thanks, Kelly. So the bank will only accept disbursement request documents electronically through a secure online portal hosted by BlackBerry Workspace. Due to information security concerns, documents submitted via Dropbox or other file sharing links will not be accepted. Prior to accessing the secure portal, an executed workspace setup form must be provided by the member and sponsor for each project. This workspace used for disbursement and initial monitoring is in addition to the workspace setup at application. Visit our website to review submission instructions and to download the workspace setup request form. Please send us an email when all disbursement documents have been uploaded to the appropriate folders. Now let's move on to initial monitoring. So the next step in the process is initial monitoring. AHP regulations require the bank to monitor all projects. By signing the direct subsidy agreement, members and sponsors agree to the bank's monitoring requirements. When the project is deemed complete, meaning all AHP subsidy is fully dispersed and the project is habitable, we will contact the project sponsor and member to start the initial monitoring review. This usually happens within 12 months of project completion. At that time, we will request documentation that was not collected at disbursement. The bank will notify the project sponsor and member by email requesting specific documentation. Because there is a considerable amount of time between application submission and project completion, we recommend creating an AHP file to prepare for disbursement and initial monitoring. The file should contain all AHP documents from construction inception to project completion, including the lease-up phase. You also want to keep track of AHP procedures and policies. These are codified in our annual AHP implementation plan. In addition, the bank sends out special attention bulletins and notices when significant changes occur in the program. And you can find these notices posted on our website under Community Programs AHP section under Policy Updates. This slide provides a list of documents that will be requested during disbursement and/or initial monitoring. We highly recommend you communicating the program requirements and application commitments to your asset manager, property manager, compliance staff, and those involved with empowerment services and income qualification. Now let's move on to validating scoring. The bank requires third-party documentation to validate the project's various scoring categories, such as targeting, empowerment services, and community stability. Depending on the project's completion status, documentation may be required at disbursement or initial monitoring. When preparing documentation for empowerment services and community stability, refer to the bank's website for a list of acceptable forms of verification. A final Excel workbook for all owner-occupied projects is required. For construction and rehab projects, we analyze the project's need for subsidy by reviewing the home buyer information worksheet and the development budget. If the buyers are offered a 0% interest mortgage, the discounted financing worksheet will be required. Now let's look at the initial monitoring workbook. The project scoring commitments are outlined in the project evaluation form attached to the direct subsidy agreement as Exhibit A. If there are any changes to these project characteristics, the project sponsor must notify the bank to ensure there are no adverse effects on the overall project score, which would render the project ineligible for subsidy. Project modifications may be made to any of the scoring categories, including but not limited to donated property, targeting, promotion of empowerment, special needs, and large units. Empowerment services must be available to all buyers free of charge. Referral services will not be eligible for points. In addition to in-person services, empowerment services may now include digital services with a live person, such as phone calls with service providers, Zoom meetings, and/or digital learning programs with a live person. These digital services must provide or must provide documentation or validation that they took place. If the sponsor is unable to provide one or more of the services committed to at application, a modification to the type of services offered and possibly a project score may be necessary. If a project needs to make a modification to its scoring commitments, the bank will first request that the project sponsor or owner make a reasonable effort to cure the modification within a reasonable period of time, or provide an explanation of why cure is not possible. The need for good cause remains. For example, if a project initially targeted all units at below 65% AMI, but now wanted to sell homes to families above 60% AMI, a reasonable period of time would need to pass where the sponsor attempted to find below 65% AMI buyers. Those efforts would need to be documented before a modification could be processed to sell homes to a higher AMI buyer. Now I'll pass it to Kelly.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sharon. So now we will go over the financial workbook. Okay, so this workbook contains 6 worksheet tabs, starting with the workbook instruction and notes. So we recommend that you review this information in the instruction tab before completing the workbook. And also be sure to use the latest version of this workbook. The date and version number are shown in the top right corner of this workbook. So the sample that we are showing here is the most current version. It is dated January 1st, 2025. Please do not use an older version from Disbursement or applications because we're going to return that to you for updating to the most latest version of the workbook. So a link to the current workbook actually included in this presentation in the slides from previous slides. So you may also find the updated AHP documents for initial monitoring and disbursement on our website under resources. So the home buyer information is the second tab of this workbook. This worksheet contains information on each home buyer, including household income, purchase price, and loan payments. We review the information to ensure the project is meeting its income targeting and affordability commitments. The worksheet also calculates the project sources of funds. Similar to the application workbook, the green shaded cells are locked from editing, and the white cells are for data entry. So make sure the buyer's income information is consistent with what was reported on the income qualification worksheet. Also, the information in the middle section of the worksheet should be consistent with the buyer's final closing statements. If the sponsor provided discounted permanent financing to the buyer, answer yes using the drop-down menu in the upper right section and complete the discounted financing worksheet. If the buyer's first loan was provided by USDA, also answer yes using the drop-down menu. So the development budget or uses of funds worksheet compares the budget at application or at disbursement with the final actual cost. At initial monitoring, All development costs must be final. So, and you can select project complete using the drop-down menu. And also remember to select the building type. Any significant changes must be explained in the comments column to the right. We will request third-party documentation to validate the development budget, which includes the final settlement statement to validate the cost of land, final construction costs, or third-party invoices. Lastly, make sure the project sources equal to uses. If the budget does not balance, enter your explanation in the comments box at the bottom of this worksheet. If discounted financing is provided by the sponsor, an imbalance in the budget will occur, and you will need to complete the discounted financing worksheet as well. So for construction or rehab projects, we also review the project's need for subsidy and financial feasibility at project completion. The Excel workbook includes a development budget like the workbook provided at time of disbursement. We compare the original budget from application to final actual cost. So be sure to provide explanation for any line item that shows significant variances. We check to ensure the budget is balanced, where total uses of funds equal to the total sources of funds. 100% of the land costs, and at least 35% of construction costs must be validated by third-party documentation. If the construction management is provided in-house, payroll history and copies of job description will need to be provided at initial monitoring. However, it is important to remember that land costs and in-house construction management costs will not be counted towards the 35% construction cost validation. Any AHP benchmark deviation will need to be explained and provide supporting backup documentation. So after completing the worksheet, check the benchmark tabs to make sure there are no deviations. The construction cost per square foot benchmark will need to be checked manually. For all benchmark deviations, a detailed written explanation and supporting documentation is required. For construction cost per square foot, make sure to check your residential square footage is reflected correctly, as this will impact the cost per square foot. The RS means information can be found on the bank's website. The developer fee must equal to or less than 15% of the total development cost. Okay, so now I will pass back to Sharon to go over the HIQW.
Thanks, Kelly. We use the HIQW to validate homeowners' income. This form is required to be signed by tenant and sponsor staff that validate income. One of the most common modifications and cause for noncompliance is when the project's final targeting does not match the original commitments. All units must be affordable as demonstrated by the housing expense ratio, which must be at or below 35% of the buyer's monthly income. At time of initial monitoring, we will ask for third-party backup documentation for a random sample of purchased units to ensure the actual household income and financing sources meet these requirements. Before uploading homebuyer documentation to the bank, please redact all confirmation or all confidential and personal information such as Social Security numbers, ID numbers, special needs information associated with medical conditions. Ensure the date of birth is visible since we need this information to determine if income verification is required. Now let's take a look at the workbook to go over the AHP income guidelines. Take note, we have recently updated the workbook as of September 2024. The AHP Household Income Qualification Workbook is an instructional workbook that has 4 tabs as shown at the bottom of this slide. The first tab is Guidelines. Tab 2, Acceptable Verification. Tab 3, Instructions. And tab 4 is the Household Income Qualification. The second tab outlines acceptable forms of income, assets, and ID verification for each household member. The third tab lists step-by-step instructions on how to complete the bank's AHP income qualification worksheet. Tab 4 is the AHP Household Income Qualification Worksheet. It serves as an income certification form. Because it is an Excel worksheet, it also calculates and shows the math on how the household's income is calculated. Shaded areas are protected. In Section 1, enter income qualification date, MSA region, and 100% AMI for the household. In Section 2, list all household members currently living at the same address. We require ID to validate all household members. Section 3, this is where all income earning assets are listed. Per our updated asset requirements, households with less than $50,000 in assets are not required to report. Make sure to check the small box in the corner of this section and provide documentation certifying that the household asset balance is below the $50K threshold. Before moving into Section 4, make sure to use at least 2 calculation methods, if possible, and choose the highest income projection. If minimal income guidelines apply, be sure to check the small box on the far right. This slide covers Section 4 and provides examples of how income is calculated for each household member. Household member number 1, employment income is estimated by using the hourly rate calculation based on information provided by the verification of employment. Household member number 2, employment income shows annualized income based on pay stubs provided. This yields a higher income projection than using average pay per period calculation. A reminder that the first pay stub of the year is required to validate the start date. Household member number 3 is not required to be reflected in this section as the household member is under 18 years old at the time of move-in and no income documentation is required from employment. Household member number 4 is reported zero income. Therefore, a zero income affidavit or certificate is required. At the bottom of the worksheet is Section 5. There are 2 signature lines. Both the owner and sponsor's signatures are required once the total income is determined. Remember, you can always refer to the instructions, which is the third tab of the workbook, if you have questions on how to complete the HIQW. If you have questions, please contact any of our compliance consultants for technical assistance. Now let's talk about retention documents. All projects must have a legally enforceable retention mechanism to secure the AHP subsidy for 5 years from project completion. Template documents are available on the bank's website under AHP Disbursement Owner-Occupied section. When using the templates, make sure to use both the promissory note and the rider to the deed of trust. The member institution may use their own deed of trust. If the member does not use the bank's template, or if the template is altered, an opinion letter from the member's attorney is required. We also now have a specific retention document for use on tribal land to go along with our 5-point scoring category for Native housing, which was added in the 2022 application round. These documents do not need to be recorded, as they will still meet the AHP regulation requirements for a legally enforceable retention mechanism. Template documents are available on the bank's AHP website under AHP Disbursement Owner-Occupied Projects. Many of the areas of the document are editable to address different tribal needs. However, if the member does not use the bank's template, or if the template is altered in ways that are not allowed, an opinion letter from the member's attorney is required. If a home buyer decides to sell their home before the 5-year retention period ends, they may be required to pay a portion of the AHP subsidy. In these instances, the seller is exempt if the building is sold to an individual earning equal to or less than the targeted AMI. Otherwise, the AHP repayment is calculated by net proceeds, which is the sales price minus reasonable customary cost, fees, and other outstanding debt. Please contact the bank if the owner is selling to determine if net proceeds repayment is required. If the home buyer wants to sell after the AHP retention period ends, the member bank is responsible for releasing the lien.
Okay, so now let's move on to non-compliance. So this is our final topic for today. The most common cause is when sponsors do not respond to the bank's initial monitoring request or are slow to respond. Also, the lack of documentation to support the project's need for subsidy and scoring categories, including income documentation, can cause the project to be non-compliant. Another common cause is when a project has not demonstrated a need for subsidy, which may be due to sources being greater than uses, or if the developer fee exceeds 15% of the development cost. Either one of these issues could trigger a partial or full recapture of the AHP subsidy. In addition, if there are changes in the scoring categories that reduce a project score to below the round's lowest score, the project may be disqualified from that round, which would require the full recapture of the subsidy. If there are any significant changes in the project, it's imperative to communicate those changes to us as soon as possible and provide a cure plan and good cause explanation so that we can work with you to ensure that your project remains eligible for the HP subsidy. Any modification that is not communicated to or approved by the bank prior to the initial monitoring may cause the project to be non-compliant. So in closing, we strongly recommend the use of the AHP retention template to ensure compliance with AHP regulations. So now this concludes the presentation portion. And here is a slice of our contact information. So if you have any specific questions pertaining to your project or any general questions, feel free to contact us by phone. And if you are not sure who to contact, your question can be sent through our general AHP email, and it will be forwarded to the appropriate team member based on your topic. And if you are interested in learning more about other community investment programs or products, you can visit our website to find out when other workshops and webinars are scheduled. Okay, so thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time scheduled to attend this webinar.